Today you're going to be working with shadow. I have a light surface. This is just a scrap piece of paper. You could also have cloth. You could go outside. The first part of this is to find an object that has a story to it. These are some glasses from 3rd grade that I have that it might be time to get rid of, but I'm really sentimental, so I'm going to take some pictures of them. As I set this up, I do already have a kind of a dim lit area I'm working in, and I also have a light source kind of mostly coming from the side, as you can see my hand. I'm going to make that a little more intense. I'm going to bring my desk lamp a little closer. It's just a desk lamp, and it has a flexible mount, so I could kind of move it. You might have to maneuver your object more than your lamp. And it does have kind of it has a direction to it. So this is the lamp. And you could also use a flashlight. As I set this up, I'm really looking for those long shadows. One of the things, if you notice, if you bring your light closer to your subject, and again, it's a very low light coming across, behind, backlit would be another thing I would call this. As it's really low, it's creating a nice long shadow, which is why in the morning and the evening, photographers get these amazing, beautiful long shadows. I also have a little light coming from above, but most of the light coming from the side. And as I move this, I can distort the shadow. Remember, our focus is on the shadow itself. As I compose this with my camera and frame this, which means to organize it, I'm going to consider whether or not the whole shadow's in, whether I include the whole object or maybe fragments of it. I might take several different pictures. I also am looking at the negative space, so if I have a piece of the table coming out, the question is, does that add to the picture or does that detract from the picture? And if I awkwardly just have a little bit cut off, that sometimes creates a feeling that's not pleasant because it seems like an afterthought. So really thinking about composing and moving, and again, I'm up a little high so that I am not putting a shadow on this object, considering where I am focusing is the other thing, is I need to make sure I'm focused on that shadow. As I take my picture, I might even brace. My hands are, you can see kind of them moving. If I can, ideally, I'd want to brace my camera. And that's just that glass we used before, just as almost kind of, and some of you have maybe even little tripods of taking photographs. Now this picture is, when I look at it, it has some contrast. It's already pretty good, and it's going to look really nice on the screen here because it's backlit with light. So it looks pretty light and bright, but I would go in and edit this. My paper is pretty dingy, honestly. So by that I mean it's kind of gray. And so I'm going to increase the exposure a little bit. And generally when you shoot things that are relatively light or dark, conversely, you need to adjust your exposure. So you'll need to either make it lighter or darker depending on what you've shot your picture against. As I go in here, the other thing that's really important to our success of this photograph is the contrast button. So I'm going to go in and increase the contrast. You're going to see this become more black and white, and this would be considered low contrast, where the shadow almost disappears. It becomes this really soft image. And we are really focusing on this shadow, so I am going to increase that contrast. And when I am happy, I'm done. The last thing I would probably do is look it over and just make sure I don't need to crop it more to make, or less, to go back, to make sure everything is on there. This is kind of a little awkward moment where it's just touching the edge of the frame. Sometimes that's funky and fun. So I'm going to actually leave that because I'm aware of that. I'm aware that this almost looks like it's propping up the edge of the picture. kind of weird. As I finish here, I'm going to upload this image and tell my story about my object. So I hope you have a good time with working with value, working with adjusting contrast, focusing on shadows, and doing a little composition, some composing and framing of an image intentionally.